The November wind cut through Kingston, Nevada like a razor blade, and Samuel Preston could see his breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn air as he rode into town on the 15th of the month in 1882. He had come to the auction expecting nothing more than perhaps a decent workhorse or some cattle to add to his modest ranch. But what he saw when he dismounted near the platform made his heart clench in a way he had never experienced in his 26 years of living. A young woman stood shivering on the auction block, her thin dress doing nothing to protect her from the biting cold. But what struck him most powerfully was the sight of her bare feet against the frost-covered wooden planks, her toes turning blue as she tried to keep her balance while the auctioneer droned on about debts and payments. Samuel pushed through the crowd of rough-looking men, his jaw tight as he heard their crude comments and saw the way they looked at her like she was nothing more than property. The girl could not have been more than 21 or 22, with long dark hair that hung in tangles around her pale face and eyes that seemed to look at nothing and everything at once. She held herself with a dignity that the circumstances could not diminish, even as her entire body trembled from the cold. The auctioneer was explaining that she was being sold to pay off her dead father's gambling debts, that whoever bought her contract would own her labor for 5 years, unless the debt was paid in full. "Do I hear $200? The auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. Several men raised their hands, their intentions clear in their leering expressions. Samuel felt something fierce and protective rise up in his chest, something that demanded action rather than thought. $500, Samuel called out, his voice loud and clear enough to silence the murmuring crowd. Every head turned to look at him, and he saw the auctioneer's eyebrows rise in surprise. The girl's eyes found his for the first time, and he saw confusion and fear warring in their green depths. 500. Well now, that is a generous offer, the auctioneer said, clearly pleased. Do I hear 600? The crowd had gone quiet. $500 was more than most of these men made in a year, and everyone knew it. Samuel kept his gaze steady on the girl, willing her to understand that he meant no harm, though he knew she had no reason to trust any man in this place. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the brown coat, the auctioneer declared, bringing his gavel down with a sharp crack. Samuel moved forward immediately, pulling off his heavy sheepskin coat as he approached the platform. The girl flinched back when he came near, but he simply held out the coat to her, keeping his distance. "Put this on," he said quietly. "And these." He sat down on the edge of the platform and pulled off his boots, ignoring the gasps and mutters from the crowd. He was left in his thick wool socks, but he did not care. He set the boots at her feet and waited. She stared at him like he had grown a second head, her arms wrapped around herself as she shivered. "I do not understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. "You are freezing," Samuel said simply. "Put them on, please." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because after a long moment she reached out and took the coat with shaking hands. It swallowed her small frame when she put it on, hanging down to her knees. She sat down carefully and slipped her frost-bitten feet into his boots, which were far too large but infinitely better than nothing. Samuel stood and offered his hand to help her down from the platform. She hesitated, then placed her small, cold hand in his. The auctioneer handed Samuel a sheaf of papers. "Her name is Georgia Palmer. The debt is $475. You have purchased her contract for 5 years of labor or until the debt is paid with interest. Sign here." Samuel signed quickly, his hand steady despite the cold that was already seeping through his socks into his feet. He folded the papers and put them in his vest pocket, then turned to Georgia. "Can you ride?" She nodded slowly, still watching him with wary eyes. He led her to where his horse was tied, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty. Samuel swung up into the saddle, then reached down to help Georgia up behind him. She grabbed his hand and let him pull her up, settling sideways behind the saddle. He could feel how badly she was shaking even through his coat. "Hold on to me," he said over his shoulder. "It is about an hour's ride to my ranch." Her arms came around his waist tentatively, and he urged Rusty into a walk, heading out of town toward the open range. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and pink. Samuel's feet were growing numb in his socks, but he did not regret his actions for a moment. He could not have stood there and watched her suffer, could not have let one of those other men buy her contract knowing what they would have demanded from her. They rode in silence for a long time, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Rusty's hooves and the whistle of the wind across the desert. Samuel could feel Georgia relaxing slightly against his back as warmth from his body, and the coat began to seep into her. Finally, she spoke, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Why did you do that?" Samuel considered his answer carefully. "Because you were cold and afraid and I could help." "You spent $500 on a stranger," she said, and he could hear the disbelief in her voice. "That is more than the debt. The extra 25 covers the interest they would have charged," Samuel said. "And you are not a stranger now. You are Georgia Palmer and I am Samuel Preston, and we are going to figure this out together." "Figure what out?" The wariness was back in her voice. "How to make sure you never feel cold again," Samuel said simply. "How to make sure you are safe and have a place to call home. How to make sure no man ever looks at you the way those men did this morning." Georgia was quiet for so long that Samuel thought perhaps he had said too much. Perhaps she thought him a fool or worse. But then he felt her forehead rest against his back, just for a moment, and he heard her whisper, "Thank you." The Preston ranch was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy wooden house with a stone chimney, a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals. Samuel had built most of it himself over the past 4 years, slowly turning his homestead claim into something that felt like home. As they rode up, an older man emerged from the barn, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Samuel. "'Bout time you got back," the man called out. "Was starting to worry you had frozen to death in town." His smile faded when he saw Georgia, and his eyes went to Samuel's sock-covered feet with concern. Samuel dismounted and reached up to help Georgia down. "Charlie, this is Georgia Palmer. Georgia, this is Charlie Martinez. He works with me on the ranch and is the best hand with horses I have ever known." Charlie was in his 50s, with silver threading through his black hair and kind brown eyes that took in the situation quickly. He tipped his hat to Georgia. "Miss Palmer, welcome to Preston Ranch." Georgia nodded but did not speak, her hands clutching Samuel's coat around herself. Samuel could see that she was exhausted, and he made a decision quickly. "Charlie, can you take care of Rusty? I need to get Georgia inside and warm." "Of course, boss." Charlie took Rusty's reins, but Samuel saw the questioning look in his eyes. There would be explanations needed later, but right now Georgia needed heat and food and safety. Samuel led Georgia to the house, opening the door to the main room that served as both kitchen and living area. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and he moved to stoke it immediately, adding wood until flames began to lick upward. The house was cold but would warm quickly with the fire going. It was a simple space but clean and comfortable, with a large table, several chairs, a cooking stove, and shelves lined with supplies. "Sit here," Samuel said, pulling one of the chairs close to the fireplace. Georgia sank into it gratefully, still wrapped in his coat. He grabbed a thick quilt from the back of the sofa and draped it over her shoulders as well, then knelt down to carefully remove his boots from her feet. Her feet were red and swollen, and he winced at the sight. "I am going to get some water warming. We need to bring feeling back into your feet slowly." He moved around the kitchen efficiently, filling a large pot with water from the pump and setting it on the stove, which he also stoked to life. He found another pair of boots in his bedroom and pulled them on along with dry socks, though his feet were aching from the cold. When he returned to the main room, Georgia was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are limping," she said. "My feet got cold," Samuel admitted. "But I will be fine. I am more concerned about yours." "Why?" The question burst out of her as if she could not contain it any longer. "Why would you hurt yourself for me? You do not know me. I am nobody." Samuel pulled another chair over and sat down facing her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You are not nobody. You are a person who deserved better than what was happening to you this morning, and I did not do anything special. I just did what any decent human being should do." "Most men would not have," Georgia said quietly, looking down at her hands. "Most men would have bought my contract for very different reasons." "I know," Samuel said, and his voice was grim. "I saw it in their faces. That is why I paid what I did, to make sure they could not have you." George's eyes met his, and he saw tears glistening there. "What happens now? The papers say I owe you 5 years of labor." Samuel stood and went to his vest, pulling out the contract papers. He carried them to the fireplace and without hesitation tossed them into the flames. Georgia gasped and jumped to her feet, the quilt falling away. "What are you doing?" she cried out. "Making sure you know that you are free," Samuel said, watching the papers curl and blacken in the fire. "You do not owe me anything. You can stay here as long as you want, and when you are ready, you can go wherever you wish. I will not hold you to a contract that never should have existed in the first place." Georgia stared at the burning papers, then at Samuel, her expression one of complete shock. "But you paid $500, and it was worth it to see you safe," Samuel said firmly. "Georgia, I do not know what your father did or what debts he left behind, but none of that is your burden to carry. You are your own person, and you deserve to have a choice in your life." She stood frozen for a long moment, and then suddenly she was crying, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Samuel did not know what to do, so he simply stood there, close enough that she knew he was present but far enough that he did not crowd her. After several minutes, the sobs subsided into hiccups, and she wiped at her face with the sleeve of his coat. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I have not cried since my father died. I could not afford to." "You can afford to now," Samuel said gently. "You are safe here." The water on the stove began to steam, and Samuel went to test the temperature. When it was warm but not hot, he poured it into a basin and carried it over to where Georgia stood. "Sit down again. We need to warm your feet." She obeyed, sitting back in the chair. Samuel knelt in front of her and carefully lifted her feet into the warm water. She gasped at the sensation, and he knew it must be painful as the feeling returned, but it was necessary. He kept one hand on the edge of the basin, ready to pull her feet out if the water proved too hot. "Tell me about your father," Samuel said, trying to distract her from the discomfort. "What was he like before the gambling?" Georgia was quiet for a moment, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. "He was kind," she finally said. "After my mother died when I was 12, it was just the two of us. He worked hard, ran a small general store in Carson City, but then something changed about 3 years ago. He started spending more time at the saloons, playing cards. He said he was going to win enough to give me a better life." Her voice broke. "Instead, he lost everything. The store, our home, all of it. He died of pneumonia last month, owing money to half the gambling halls in Nevada. They came for me the next day." "I am sorry," Samuel said, and he meant it deeply. "That should not have happened to you." "Life is not fair," Georgia said, but there was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion. "I learned that when my mother died, but I kept hoping that maybe things would get better, that maybe my father would stop. He never did." Samuel let her feet soak for a while longer, then carefully dried them with a soft cloth and wrapped them in clean wool socks. They looked better already, the color returning to normal. "You should rest," he said. "There is a bedroom down that hallway. It is small but comfortable. You can sleep as long as you need to." Georgia looked at him with uncertainty. "Where will you sleep?" "I have another room, and worst case the sofa is comfortable enough," Samuel said with a slight smile. "Please, Georgia, you are exhausted. Rest, and when you wake, we can figure out what comes next." She stood slowly, testing her feet. "They feel better. Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" "Well, with Charlie, but why is there an extra bedroom with women's quilts on the bed?" Samuel felt his chest tighten at the question. "My sister lived with me until last year. She married a man from Sacramento and moved to California. I have been meaning to take down some of her things, but I have not gotten around to it. You are welcome to use whatever you find in there. The clothes might be a bit large, but they will be warmer than what you are wearing." "You have been very kind to me," Georgia said softly. "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Samuel said firmly. "Just rest. That is all I ask." Georgia nodded and walked slowly down the hallway. Samuel heard the door to the bedroom close softly, and he let out a long breath. What had he done? He had just spent his entire savings on a woman he did not know, burned her contract, and invited her to stay in his home. Charlie was going to think he had lost his mind. As if summoned by the thought, Charlie came in through the door, stomping snow from his boots. "Rusty is settled in the barn, fed and brushed. Now you want to tell me what in the blazes happened in town." Samuel gestured to the kitchen table, and both men sat down. Over the next half hour, Samuel explained everything he had seen and done. Charlie listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful as the story progressed. When Samuel finished, Charlie was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You did the right thing, son, but you know this is going to complicate your life considerably." "I know," Samuel admitted, "but I could not walk away. Charlie, she was barefoot in the frost. Her feet were turning blue. And those men looking at her like she was a piece of meat to be bought and used. I could not let that happen." "Your father would be proud of you," Charlie said quietly. "He raised you to do the right thing even when it is hard. But Samuel, you need to think about what comes next. That girl has been through hell and she is going to need time to heal. You cannot expect anything from her." "I do not expect anything," Samuel said firmly. "I burned the contract, Charlie. She is free to leave whenever she wants." Charlie's eyebrows rose. "You burned $500. "I burned a piece of paper that said one human being owned another," Samuel corrected. "The money is gone, yes, but I will earn it back. What I could not earn back was a clear conscience if I had let her be sold to someone who would have hurt her." Charlie studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are a good man, Samuel Preston, better than most. All right, so what is the plan? Winter is coming on hard and we need to get the cattle down from the high range before the real snows hit." They spent the next hour discussing ranch business, but Samuel's mind kept drifting to the young woman sleeping in his sister's old room. He wondered what her life had been like, what dreams she had held before her father's gambling destroyed everything. He wondered if she would stay or if she would leave as soon as she was able. The thought of her leaving caused a strange ache in his chest, which he firmly told himself was ridiculous. He had known her for all of 3 hours. The sun was high in the sky when Samuel heard the bedroom door open. He looked up from the accounting ledger he had been reviewing to see Georgia emerge, wearing a simple blue dress that had belonged to his sister. It fit her reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in places. Her hair was brushed and tied back with a ribbon, and her face looked less pale, though her eyes were still shadowed with exhaustion. "Good afternoon," Samuel said, standing up. "Did you manage to sleep?" "A little," Georgia said. "The bed is very comfortable. I kept waking up thinking it was a dream and I was still in that cold jail cell where they kept me before the auction." Samuel felt anger flash through him at the thought of her locked in a cell, but he kept his voice calm. "You are not there anymore. You are here and you are safe. Are you hungry?" "Starving," Georgia admitted. "I have not eaten in 2 days." Samuel moved to the kitchen area immediately, stirring the coals in the stove back to life. "I can make eggs and bacon, biscuits if you do not mind them being a little rough. I am not much of a cook, but I manage." "I can cook," Georgia said, stepping forward. "If you want, I can make lunch for us. For you and Charlie, I mean. It is the least I can do." Samuel wanted to tell her she did not need to do anything, but he saw something in her expression that made him pause. She needed to feel useful, to feel like she had some control over her situation. "That would be very kind of you," he said instead. "The eggs are in that basket, bacon in the cold box outside the back door, flour in the barrel there." Georgia moved around the kitchen with a confidence that had been absent before, gathering ingredients and utensils. Samuel sat back down at the table and watched her work, noting the practiced way she mixed biscuit dough and sliced bacon. She had clearly done this many times before. Within 30 minutes, the small house was filled with the smell of cooking food, and Charlie came in from the barn, drawn by the aroma. "Something smells mighty good in here," Charlie said, taking off his hat as he entered. He nodded to Georgia. "Hope you got some rest, Miss Palmer." "Please call me Georgia," she said, sliding biscuits into the oven. "And yes, thank you. Your house is very comfortable, Mr. Preston." "It is Samuel's house," Charlie said with a grin. "I just work here, but I am glad you find it comfortable." They sat down to lunch together, and Samuel was impressed by the quality of the meal. The biscuits were light and fluffy, the eggs perfectly cooked, the bacon crisp. Georgia ate with the focused intensity of someone who had been too long without food, and Samuel made sure to pass her the basket of biscuits twice. "This is delicious," Charlie said around a mouthful of food. "Miss Georgia, you are a fine cook." "My mother taught me," Georgia said quietly. "She said a woman needed to know how to run a household properly. I used to help her cook for my father and the workers at our store." "Well, her lessons certainly stuck," Samuel said. "This is the best meal I have had in months." A faint blush colored Georgia's cheeks at the compliment, and Samuel felt something warm settle in his chest. They finished the meal with easy conversation, Charlie telling stories about some of the trouble the cattle had gotten into recently, Samuel adding his own observations. Georgia listened and laughed in a few places, and Samuel noticed that the wariness in her eyes was beginning to ease just slightly. After lunch, Charlie excused himself to get back to work, and Samuel helped Georgia clean up the dishes. They worked in companionable silence, and Samuel found himself very aware of her presence beside him at the wash basin. She was small, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, but there was a strength in the set of her jaw and the way she moved that spoke of resilience. "Samuel," Georgia said as she dried the last plate, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, wiping down the table. "What do you expect from me?" The question was direct, her green eyes meeting his steadily. "You said I am free, but nobody does what you did without wanting something in return. I just need to know what it is so I can decide what to do." Samuel set down the cloth and turned to face her fully. "I expect nothing from you," he said clearly. "But if you want to know what I hope, I can tell you that. I hope you will stay here, at least through the winter. It is going to get cold and traveling would be dangerous. I hope that you will feel safe here and that maybe, in time, you will come to think of this place as home. I hope that you will take the time to figure out what you want from your life, and that you will know you have the freedom to pursue it. And I hope that maybe we can become friends." Georgia searched his face for a long moment, as if looking for any hint of deception. "Finally," she said, "just friends. You do not want anything else." Samuel felt his face heat slightly. "Georgia, you are a beautiful woman, and I would be lying if I said I had not noticed. But you have been through something traumatic, and the last thing you need is a man making demands on you. If friendship is all you ever want from me, that will be enough. And if someday you want something different, whether with me or someone else, that will be your choice to make." He saw tears gather in her eyes again, but this time she smiled through them. "You are the strangest man I have ever met, Samuel Preston, but I think maybe you are also the kindest. Yes, I will stay, at least through the winter, and I would like very much to be your friend." "Good," Samuel said, and the relief he felt was profound. "Then let me show you around the ranch properly, so you know where everything is." He gave her a tour of the property, showing her the barn where Rusty and the other horses were kept, the chicken coop where a dozen hens clucked and scratched, the small smokehouse, and the various outbuildings. The ranch sat in a valley with hills rising on 3 sides, offering some protection from the worst of the winter winds. A creek ran through the property, currently running low but reliable even in dry seasons, according to Samuel. "It is not much," Samuel admitted as they stood looking out over the property. "But it is mine, built with my own hands and honest work. My father homesteaded this land before he died, and I have been building it up ever since." "It is beautiful," Georgia said, and she sounded like she meant it. "It must be a lot of work for just you and Charlie." "It keeps us busy," Samuel agreed, "especially during calving season and when we are moving cattle. But we manage. Charlie has been with me since the beginning, and he is worth 3 men when it comes to work." They walked back to the house as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple. Georgia shivered slightly in the cooling air, and Samuel made a mental note to see about getting her a proper coat. His sister's things should still be in the chest in the bedroom, including her heavy wool coat. That evening, Georgia insisted on making dinner, and Samuel let her, understanding that she needed to contribute in some way to feel right about staying. She made a simple stew with beef and vegetables, and they ate together at the table, Charlie joining them again. The conversation flowed more easily now, and Samuel noticed that Georgia was beginning to relax, her smiles coming more frequently. After Charlie left for his own small cabin behind the barn, Samuel and Georgia sat by the fire. He had a book he was reading, a collection of essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Georgia had found some mending that needed doing among his sister's things. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. "Samuel," Georgia said after a while, "what happened to your parents? You mentioned your father homesteaded this land, but you have not talked about them much." Samuel set down his book and stared into the fire. "My mother died when I was 15. Fever took her one winter. My father lived until I was 22. He had a bad fall from his horse and never really recovered. My sister Catherine and I buried him on that hill over there." He gestured toward the window, though it was too dark to see anything now. "He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching and about how to treat people with respect." "I am sorry you lost them," Georgia said softly, "but it sounds like they left you with something precious, the knowledge of how to be a good person." "I try to live up to what they taught me," Samuel said. "I do not always succeed, but I try. What about you? What are your dreams, Georgia? What did you want to do before everything fell apart?" Georgia was quiet for so long that Samuel thought perhaps he had overstepped, but then she spoke. I wanted to be a teacher. There was a women's college in Sacramento that was accepting students, and I was saving money to apply. My father did not approve. He said teaching was acceptable, but college was unnecessary for a woman. Then he started gambling, and all my savings disappeared along with everything else. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Samuel could hear the pain beneath the words. Maybe you could still do it, Samuel suggested. Apply to the college, I mean. It is not too late. Georgia looked at him with surprise. I have no money, no references, nothing. How could I possibly go to college now? You are smart and capable, Samuel said firmly. And there are ways. Work, scholarships, determination. If it is what you truly want, we can figure out how to make it happen. Why would you help me do that? Georgia asked. If I went to college, I would have to leave here. Because your dreams matter, Samuel said simply. And because I meant what I said earlier, I want you to have the freedom to pursue what you want from life. If that is teaching, then that is what you should do. Georgia set down her mending and looked at him with an expression he could not quite decipher. I think I am beginning to understand why you did what you did this morning. You really do care about people, do you not? Not just the people you know, but everyone. Samuel felt uncomfortable with the praise. I just try to do what is right. Most people do not even do that, Georgia said. You are special, Samuel Preston. I hope you know that. The fire crackled between them, and Samuel felt something shift in the air, something delicate and new. He changed the subject, asking Georgia about her childhood, and she told him stories of growing up in Carson City, of helping in her father's store and learning to read from her mother's collection of books. In turn, Samuel told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk and helping his father with the cattle from the time he was old enough to sit a horse. They talked until the fire burned low, and when Georgia finally excused herself to go to bed, Samuel found himself already looking forward to seeing her at breakfast. It was a dangerous feeling, he knew, but he could not seem to stop it. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel and Charlie worked the ranch, bringing the cattle down from the high range before winter set in fully, repairing fences and buildings, and preparing for the hard months ahead. Georgia took over the cooking and much of the household management, proving herself to be efficient and capable. She also insisted on helping with the outdoor work when Samuel would let her, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, and even helping to groom the horses. Samuel watched her grow stronger and more confident with each passing day. The haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet contentment. She laughed more easily, and Samuel found that he would do almost anything to hear that sound. He was falling for her, he knew, and falling hard. But he kept his feelings to himself, determined not to pressure her or make her uncomfortable. One afternoon in early December, Samuel came back to the house to find Georgia in the barn, brushing down Rusty with careful strokes. The horse was clearly enjoying the attention, his eyes half closed in contentment. Samuel leaned against the stall door and watched her, admiring the gentle way she spoke to the animal. He likes you, Samuel said, announcing his presence. Georgia looked up with a smile. I like him too. He is sweet-natured for such a big horse. He is a good fellow, Samuel agreed, moving into the stall to check Rusty's hooves. But he is also clever. He once figured out how to unlatch his stall door and let all the other horses out. Took us half a day to round them all up again. Georgia laughed, and the sound filled the barn with warmth. I imagine that was quite an adventure. That is one word for it, Samuel said with a grin. He set down Rusty's hoof and straightened, suddenly very aware of how close Georgia was standing. He could smell the lavender soap she used, and he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes. Georgia, he said softly, and then stopped, not knowing how to continue. Yes, she prompted, looking up at him. Samuel almost said what he was thinking, almost told her that he had been wrong when he said he only wanted friendship. But he held back, reminding himself that it had only been 3 weeks since he had brought her here, that she needed time and space, that his feelings were his problem to manage. I was just going to say that you have a way with horses. If you ever wanted to learn to ride properly, I would be happy to teach you. Something flickered in George's eyes, disappointment perhaps, but it was gone so quickly that Samuel thought he might have imagined it. I would like that, she said. I have only ridden a horse a handful of times and I was not very good at it. We will start slow, Samuel promised. Maybe tomorrow if the weather holds. That night, Samuel lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. He thought about Georgia sleeping down the hall, about the way she had looked at him in the barn, about the growing ache in his chest every time she smiled. He was in trouble, deep trouble, and he had no idea what to do about it. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that promised no snow for at least a few days. After breakfast, Samuel saddled up a gentle mare named Daisy and brought her to the corral. Georgia came out wearing a split skirt that had belonged to Catherine and looking nervous but determined. Daisy is the sweetest horse on the ranch, Samuel said, stroking the mare's nose. She will take good care of you. Come here, I will help you mount. He showed Georgia how to put her foot in the stirrup and swing up into the saddle, steadying her with his hands on her waist. Once she was settled, he adjusted the stirrups to the right length and handed her the reins. Just hold them loosely. Daisy knows what to do. I will lead her around the corral a few times until you get comfortable. Samuel took Daisy's lead rope and began walking her in slow circles around the corral. Georgia gripped the saddle horn with one hand, her knuckles white, but gradually she began to relax. After several circuits, Samuel let go of the lead rope and stepped back. Just squeeze gently with your legs to ask her to walk. Pull back slightly on the reins to ask her to stop. Georgia followed his instructions, and Daisy responded perfectly, walking sedately around the corral. Samuel watched with a smile as Georgia's confidence grew. By the end of the lesson, she was sitting straighter in the saddle and even attempting a slow trot. When she finally dismounted, her face was flushed with pleasure. That was wonderful, she said breathlessly. I felt like I was flying. You did great, Samuel said, and he meant it. A few more lessons and you will be ready to ride out on the range with me and Charlie. I would like that, Georgia said, meeting his eyes. There was something in her gaze that made Samuel's heart beat faster. But before he could respond, Charlie called out from the barn that one of the cows was having trouble calving and needed help. Samuel excused himself reluctantly and went to help, spending the next several hours working to save both the cow and her calf. By the time he returned to the house, exhausted and covered in blood and other fluids, the sun was setting. He found Georgia in the kitchen, and she took one look at him and pointed to the door. Go wash up outside. You are not bringing that smell into my clean kitchen. Samuel laughed despite his exhaustion. Yes, madam. Is there hot water? I will bring some out to you, Georgia said, but her eyes were warm with amusement. Samuel stripped off his shirt outside and used the cold water from the pump to wash the worst of the mess off his hands and arms. Georgia came out with a steaming kettle and poured it into the basin he used for washing, averting her eyes from his bare chest. Samuel found himself wishing she would look, which was a ridiculous thought. He washed quickly, scrubbing hard to remove all traces of the barn. When he was clean, he put on a fresh shirt that Georgia had brought out for him and went inside to find dinner waiting on the table. They ate together, and Samuel told her about the difficult calving and how both mother and baby had survived. You care about your animals a great deal, Georgia observed. They are my livelihood, Samuel said. But more than that, they are under my protection. It is my responsibility to care for them properly. You take your responsibilities seriously, Georgia said softly. I have noticed that about you, whether it is your animals or a stranger you found barefoot at an auction. Samuel met her eyes. Some things are more important than money or convenience. Doing the right thing, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, those matter. I am not helpless, Georgia said, but there was no anger in her voice, only a need to be understood. I know you are not, Samuel said quickly. Georgia, you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. What you survived, what you have overcome, it speaks to incredible strength. But strength does not mean you have to face everything alone. It is okay to let people help you. Georgia looked down at her plate. It is hard for me to accept help. My father spent so many years taking and taking. I swore I would never be a burden on anyone. You are not a burden, Samuel said firmly. You have made this house feel like a home again. You have brought light and warmth into a place that was starting to feel empty. If anything, I should be thanking you. Georgia's eyes were bright with unshed tears when she looked up at him. You really mean that, do you not? You are not just saying it to make me feel better. I mean every word, Samuel said. Georgia, he stopped, the words catching in his throat. He wanted to tell her that he was falling in love with her, that the thought of her leaving was becoming unbearable, that he wanted her to stay not just for the winter but forever. But it was too soon, too much, too risky. I am very glad you are here, he finished lamely. Something flickered across Georgia's face, and Samuel could have sworn it was disappointment again. But she smiled and said, I am glad I am here too. Thank you, Samuel, for everything. Christmas came, and Samuel was determined to make it special for Georgia. He rode into town and bought fabric for a new dress, yarn for knitting, and a set of books he thought she might enjoy. He also bought ingredients for a proper Christmas feast, something he had not bothered with since Catherine left. On Christmas Eve, Samuel presented Georgia with the gifts wrapped in brown paper. She opened them slowly, her hands trembling slightly. When she saw the books, titles about teaching methods and educational theory, her eyes filled with tears. You remembered, she whispered. About me wanting to be a teacher. Of course I remembered, Samuel said. Your dreams are important, Georgia. I want you to know that I support them, whatever they are. Georgia set the books aside carefully and looked at him with an expression that made his heart race. Samuel Preston, you are the most remarkable man I have ever met. Do you know that? I am just me, Samuel said, feeling his face heat. Exactly, Georgia said softly. She stood and moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the individual lashes framing her eyes. Just you, which is more than enough. Samuel thought she might kiss him, hoped she might, but instead she took his hand and squeezed it gently. I have something for you too, but it is not as grand as what you gave me. She went to the bedroom and returned with a package wrapped in cloth. Samuel opened it to find a thick wool scarf, knitted in shades of dark blue and gray. You made this? He asked, running his fingers over the tight, even stitches. I have been working on it at night after you go to bed, Georgia admitted. I wanted to give you something to show my gratitude. I know it is not much. It is perfect, Samuel said, wrapping the scarf around his neck immediately. It was warm and soft, and it smelled faintly of lavender like Georgia. This is the best gift I have received in years. Thank you. They spent Christmas Day together, cooking an enormous feast that they shared with Charlie. They sang carols, played cards, and told stories. It was the best Christmas Samuel had experienced since his parents died, and he could see that Georgia felt the same way. She laughed freely, her face glowing in the firelight, and Samuel committed every moment to memory. As winter deepened, Samuel continued to give Georgia riding lessons. She proved to be a quick learner, and within a few weeks, she was confident enough to ride out onto the range with him. They spent hours together on horseback, checking on the cattle and riding the fence lines. Samuel showed her every corner of his property, and Georgia asked endless questions about ranching, soaking up information like a sponge. One afternoon in late January, they rode to the top of the highest hill on Samuel's property. From there, they could see for miles in every direction, the Nevada landscape stretching out in shades of brown and gold under a pale winter sky. Samuel dismounted and helped Georgia down, and they stood side by side, looking out over the view. "It is beautiful," Georgia said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I can see why you love it here." "It gets into your blood," Samuel agreed. "This land, this way of life. It is hard and sometimes brutal, but it is honest work, and it is mine. Or ours, I suppose, Charlie and me." He paused, then added quietly, "And yours too, if you want it." Georgia turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "What are you saying, Samuel?" Samuel took a deep breath, deciding to take a risk. "I am saying that I do not want you to leave when winter ends. I am saying that I want you to stay, not as a guest or someone working off a debt that does not exist, but as someone who belongs here. I am saying that over the past 2 months, you have become the most important person in my life, and the thought of you leaving tears me apart inside." "Samuel," Georgia breathed his name, and he saw tears on her cheeks. "I know it is too soon," Samuel continued quickly. "I know you have been through hell and you need time. I am not asking for anything except that you consider staying. We can go as slow as you need. We can just be friends if that is all you want. But Georgia, you asked me once what I expected from you, and I told you nothing. That was true then. But if you want to know what I hope for now, I hope that maybe someday you might feel for me even a fraction of what I feel for you." Georgia reached up and touched his face with her gloved hand, her touch gentle. "You foolish, wonderful man, do you really not know?" "Know what?" Samuel asked, hardly daring to breathe. "That I have been falling in love with you since the moment you took off your coat and boots in front of that entire crowd," Georgia said, her voice shaking with emotion. "That I have been hoping you would say something like this for weeks now. That I already think of this place as home, not because of the house or the land, but because you are here." Samuel felt like the world had stopped spinning. "You love me." "I love you," Georgia confirmed, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time. "I love you so much that it scares me. I did not think I could feel this way about anyone, especially not after everything that happened. But you make me feel safe and cherished and valued. You see me, Samuel, not as property or as a burden, but as a person with worth and dreams and potential. How could I not love you?" Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. He could feel her heart beating against his, and he thought his own heart might burst with joy. "Georgia Palmer, you are the most incredible woman I have ever known. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love the way you laugh and the way you are not afraid to speak your mind. I love everything about you." Georgia pulled back just enough to look up at him, and Samuel saw everything he felt reflected in her eyes. This time when she moved closer, he met her halfway, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. The world around them disappeared, leaving only this moment, this connection, this perfect rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against George's. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Georgia. Make this ranch our home. Build a life with me." Georgia pulled back, and for a moment Samuel was terrified that he had pushed too hard, too fast. But then she smiled, that radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Preston, today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Yes." Samuel kissed her again, longer this time, trying to pour everything he felt into that single kiss. When they finally pulled apart, they were both grinning like fools. They rode back to the ranch house hand in hand, their horses walking side by side. Charlie took one look at their faces when they arrived and broke into a huge smile. "About time," he said. "I was starting to think you two were never going to figure it out." "You knew?" Samuel asked, surprised. "Son, everyone knew except apparently the two of you," Charlie said with a laugh. "The way you looked at each other, it was clear as day. I am happy for you both. Truly." They decided to get married in Kingston in 2 weeks, giving them time to make arrangements and for Samuel to buy Georgia a proper wedding dress. The time passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Samuel rode into town and spoke with the minister, arranged for a small celebration at the hotel, and bought rings from the jeweler. Georgia sewed herself a dress from the fabric Samuel had given her for Christmas, working late into the night to get every detail perfect. The morning of the wedding, Samuel woke to find fresh snow falling, covering the landscape in a blanket of white. It seemed fitting somehow, this fresh start on a clean canvas. He dressed in his best suit, the one he had worn to his father's funeral and not touched since. Charlie helped him with his tie, which Samuel fumbled with nervously. "Relax, son," Charlie said with a grin. "She already said yes. The hard part is over." "What if I mess this up?" Samuel asked, voicing his deepest fear. "What if I cannot make her happy?" "You already make her happy," Charlie said firmly. "I have watched that girl bloom like a flower in spring since she came here. She was so scared and hurt when you brought her home, and now look at her. She laughs, she sings while she cooks. She is learning to ride like she was born in a saddle." "You did that, Samuel. Your kindness, your patience, your love. You already know how to make her happy. Just keep doing what you have been doing." Samuel nodded, trying to take the words to heart. They rode into Kingston together, Samuel, Charlie, and Georgia, arriving at the church just before noon. The building was small but well-maintained, with whitewashed walls and simple wooden pews. Several townspeople had gathered, curious about the cowboy who had caused such a stir at the auction 2 months prior. Samuel waited at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. And then Georgia appeared in the doorway, and Samuel forgot how to breathe. She wore a dress of deep green that matched her eyes, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through it. She looked like something out of a dream, beautiful and radiant and so full of joy that Samuel felt his eyes sting with tears. Charlie walked her down the aisle, having volunteered for the honor, and placed her hand in Samuel's with a gentle pat on his shoulder. Samuel held her hand tightly, afraid that if he let go, this perfect moment would disappear. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage and the responsibilities that came with it. Samuel barely heard the words, too focused on Georgia's face, on the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the world. When it came time for the vows, his voice was steady and clear. "I, Samuel Joseph Preston, take you, Georgia Me Palmer, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, to cherish you, to protect you, and to stand by your side through whatever life brings us. I promise to support your dreams and to build a life with you that honors us both. From this day forward, you will never feel cold or alone or afraid again, because I will be there to keep you warm, to stand beside you, and to face every challenge with you. This I swear on everything I hold sacred." Georgia's eyes were streaming with tears, but she smiled as she spoke her own vows. I, Georgia Me Palmer, take you, Samuel Joseph Preston, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with everything I have, to be your partner and your friend, to build a home with you and fill it with laughter and warmth. You saved me, not just from the cold and the auction, but from a life without hope or joy. You showed me what true kindness and love look like, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to give back even a fraction of what you have given me. This I promise, from this day until my last day. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Samuel kissed his bride, hardly believing that this was real, that this amazing woman was now his wife. The small congregation applauded, and Samuel and Georgia walked back down the aisle hand in hand, grinning at each other like children. The celebration at the hotel was small but joyful. There was food and music, and several people came to offer their congratulations. Samuel noticed that some of the men who had bid on Georgia at the auction were there, and he felt a surge of protective pride when they looked at her with respect rather than lust. She was his wife now, and she stood beside him glowing with happiness. They danced together, and Samuel held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "I love you, Mrs. Preston," he murmured against her ear. "I love you too, Mr. Preston," she replied, and the sound of his name in her voice sent shivers down his spine. They left the celebration as the sun was setting, riding back to the ranch in the wagon Samuel had borrowed for the occasion. Charlie had ridden ahead on horseback, promising to make himself scarce for the evening. The ranch house glowed with lamplight when they arrived, and Samuel helped Georgia down from the wagon, then swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Samuel said, kicking open the door and carrying her inside. "It is tradition." He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy. "So we are married," Georgia said softly. "We are married," Samuel confirmed. He reached out and gently removed the pins from her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "Georgia, I want you to know that we can take this as slow as you need. I will not pressure you or expect anything you are not ready to give." Georgia stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. "Samuel Preston, I chose you, I chose this. I am your wife, and I want to be your wife in every way. Do not treat me like I might break. I am stronger than you think." "I know you are strong," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I also know you have been hurt, and I will not add to that hurt for anything." "Then love me," Georgia said simply. "Love me the way you have been loving me all along, with kindness and patience and that incredible gentleness that makes me feel cherished. That is all I need." Samuel kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Georgia responded with equal passion. They stumbled toward the bedroom, hands exploring, hearts racing, and Samuel sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for this gift he had been given, this woman who had come into his life barefoot in the frost and changed everything. The months that followed were the happiest of Samuel's life. He and Georgia fell into an easy partnership, working together to run the ranch and build their life. Georgia proved to be an asset in every way, helping with the cattle, managing the household finances, and even helping to deliver calves when needed. She was not afraid of hard work, and Samuel loved watching her grow into her role as a rancher's wife. They talked late into the nights about their dreams and plans. Georgia had not given up on her desire to teach, and Samuel encouraged her to pursue it. They discussed the possibility of opening a small school on the ranch for the children of neighboring homesteaders, a project that excited them both. In April, Georgia shyly told Samuel that she thought she might be pregnant. Samuel was overjoyed, and his protectiveness toward her increased tenfold. Georgia laughed at his attempts to keep her from doing any heavy work, reminding him that she was pregnant, not ill. But she let him fuss over her because she could see how happy it made him. Their son was born in November of 1883, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas Joseph Preston, after Samuel's father, and Samuel wept when he held his son for the first time. Georgia, exhausted but radiant, smiled at him from the bed. "We made that," she said softly. "That perfect little person is ours." "He is a miracle," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion, "just like his mother." Charlie became a doting honorary grandfather, spending hours with baby Thomas and regaling him with stories even though the baby could not possibly understand them. The ranch house filled with the sounds of a baby's cries and laughter, and Samuel thought his heart might burst with the fullness of his life. When Thomas was 6 months old, Georgia approached Samuel with a proposal. She wanted to start the school they had discussed, offering free education to any child in the area who wanted to learn. Samuel agreed immediately, and they spent the summer building a small schoolhouse on the property, close enough to the main house that Georgia could keep an eye on Thomas while she taught. Word spread quickly, and by the time school started in September of 1884, Georgia had 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, and Samuel would often stop by during his workday to watch her in action. She was a natural teacher, patient and encouraging, and her students adored her. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both productive and deeply satisfying. The ranch prospered under Samuel and George's joint management, and they were able to save enough money to expand their land holdings and buy more cattle. Charlie continued to work with them, becoming more of a family member than an employee. In the spring of 1886, Georgia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose Preston after Samuel's sister. She was a tiny thing, smaller than Thomas had been, but fierce and determined from her first breath. Samuel fell in love with her instantly, this little girl who looked so much like her mother. As the years passed, Samuel would sometimes think back to that cold November morning when he had ridden into Kingston expecting nothing more than a routine auction. He thought about the choice he had made, the $500 he had spent without hesitation, the contract he had burned. It had seemed like such a huge risk at the time, such an impulsive decision, but it had been the best decision of his life. He would watch Georgia teaching their children to read, or working alongside him during the spring roundup, or dancing in the kitchen while she cooked dinner, and he would be overwhelmed with gratitude. This life they had built together, this family they had created, this love that grew stronger with each passing day, it was everything he had never known he wanted. One evening in the fall of 1889, after the children were in bed, Samuel and Georgia sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas was 6 now, a lively boy who already showed promise as a horseman. Catherine was 3, sweet-natured but stubborn as a mule when she wanted something. Inside, Georgia was pregnant again with their third child, due in the winter. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Georgia turned to look at him, confused. "Regret what? Marrying me, staying here, giving up your dream of going to college and seeing the world?" Georgia laughed, a sound full of genuine amusement. "Samuel Preston, are you serious? This life is better than any dream I could have imagined. I have my school, I have my students, I have work that matters and challenges me every day. And more than all of that, I have you and our children. I have a family and a home and a partnership that fulfills me in ways I did not know were possible. College could not have given me that. The world could not have given me that. You gave me that. I just want to make sure you are happy," Samuel said quietly. that you do not feel trapped or limited." Georgia stood and moved to sit in his lap, something she still did despite being 7 months pregnant with their third child. She cupped his face in her hands and looked directly into his eyes. "I have never been more free than I am right now. Free to be myself, to pursue my passions, to make choices about my life. You gave me that freedom, Samuel. From the moment you put your coat around my shoulders and your boots on my feet, you have been giving me the gift of choice and agency and love. How could I possibly regret that?" Samuel wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I love you so much, Georgia Preston, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Georgia said, resting her head on his shoulder. "My brave cowboy who saw a woman in need and did not look away. You changed my life that day." "You changed mine," Samuel corrected. "I was just existing before you came along. You made me live." They sat like that until the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the stars began to appear. Just two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Their third child, a son they named Benjamin Charles Preston after Charlie, was born in January of 1890. The birth was harder than the previous two, and Samuel spent hours pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife worked. When he was finally allowed in to see Georgia, she was pale and exhausted, but smiling as she held their new son. "He looks like you," she said softly. "Look, he has your nose." Samuel examined the tiny baby, hardly able to believe something so small could be so perfect. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for our family." "We made this together," Georgia reminded him, but her eyes were warm with love. As Benjamin grew, it became clear that he had inherited his father's gentle nature and his mother's fierce intelligence. The Preston household was loud and chaotic and full of love, exactly the way Samuel had always hoped it would be. Charlie, now in his 60s, began to slow down with the physical demands of ranch work. Samuel and Georgia insisted he reduce his hours and spend more time resting, but Charlie was stubborn. It was Georgia who finally convinced him by pointing out that the grandchildren needed someone to watch them while she taught school. And would not he be perfect for the job? Charlie took to the role with enthusiasm, becoming the children's favorite storyteller and playmate. He taught Thomas to rope, helped Catherine learn to braid horses' manes, and rocked baby Benjamin to sleep with songs in Spanish that his own mother had sung to him. In the summer of 1892, Catherine Preston, Samuel's sister, came to visit from California with her husband and 3 children. It was the first time the siblings had seen each other in years, and the reunion was emotional. Catherine was amazed by everything Samuel and Georgia had built, and she pulled Georgia aside on the second day of the visit. "I need to thank you," Catherine said, taking Georgia's hands. "Thank me." "For what?" Georgia asked, confused. "For making my brother happy, for giving him the family he always wanted. When I left for California, I worried about him being here alone. He was so lonely, though he would never admit it. But you changed everything. He is happy, Georgia, truly, deeply happy. I can see it in everything he does. So thank you for loving him and for building this beautiful life with him." Georgia felt tears prick her eyes. "He saved me. I was at my lowest point, and he saw me as a person worth saving. How could I not love him?" "He has always had the biggest heart," Catherine agreed. "Our father used to say that Samuel felt things more deeply than most people. It made him vulnerable, but it also made him capable of incredible love. I am so glad he found someone who appreciates that and returns it." The two women embraced, and from that visit forward, they maintained a regular correspondence that enriched both their lives. As the 1890s progressed, the Preston Ranch became one of the most successful in the area. Samuel's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, and he was frequently asked to serve on various committees and organizations. He always declined, preferring to focus on his family and his land. Georgia's school continued to grow, and she added more students each year. Some of her earliest students went on to attend college themselves, and they wrote her letters telling her how much her teaching had meant to them. She kept every letter in a box under the bed, pulling them out occasionally to read when she needed a reminder that her work mattered. In 1895, Georgia gave birth to their fourth and final child, another daughter they named Rose Marie Preston. By then, Thomas was 12 and already working alongside his father on the ranch. Catherine was 9 and showing signs of wanting to become a teacher like her mother. Benjamin was 5 and the family comedian, always ready with a joke or a funny face to make everyone laugh. Rose was a quiet baby, content to observe the chaos of the Preston household with wide, solemn eyes. As she grew, it became clear that she had inherited the best traits of both her parents, Samuel's calm strength and Georgia's sharp intelligence. The Preston family became a fixture in the community. They were known for their generosity, often helping neighbors who fell on hard times and never expecting repayment. Georgia made sure her school remained free to all who wanted to attend, and Samuel frequently donated cattle to families who needed food. One evening in the fall of 1898, Samuel and Georgia celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children were in bed. They sat at the table where they had shared so many meals, holding hands and reflecting on the journey they had taken together. 16 years, Georgia marveled. It feels like yesterday and like forever at the same time. I remember everything about the day I met you, Samuel said. The way you held yourself so straight even though you were shaking from the cold, the color of your feet against the frost. The look in your eyes when I offered you my coat. I knew in that moment that my life was about to change. I thought you were crazy, Georgia admitted with a laugh. This stranger taking off his boots in front of everyone, spending all that money. I did not understand why anyone would do that for me. And now, Samuel asked. Now I understand that it is just who you are, Georgia said softly. You see someone in need and you help without calculation or expectation of return. You are the best man I know, Samuel Preston, the absolute best. I am just a man who got lucky enough to find the love of his life standing barefoot in the frost, Samuel said. Everything good in my life has come from that moment. Our marriage, our children, the life we have built. It all started because I could not walk away from you. I am glad you did not walk away, Georgia said. I am glad you saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Samuel said firmly. But more than that, you were worth loving, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They kissed across the table, a sweet, lingering kiss that spoke of years of partnership and passion and profound connection. As the new century approached, the Preston family prepared to enter it with hope and excitement. Thomas, now 17, had decided to stay on the ranch and eventually take it over from his father. Catherine, 14, was planning to attend the women's college in Sacramento that her mother had once dreamed of, with Samuel and Georgia's full support and encouragement. Benjamin, 10, was still deciding what he wanted to do with his life, but he had recently expressed interest in becoming a veterinarian. Rose, just 4, was too young to know what the future held, but she was already showing signs of her mother's love of learning. Charlie, now 71, had finally fully retired from ranch work, though he still helped with small tasks and spent most of his time with the children. He had become an integral part of the family, as much a grandfather to the Preston children as if they had been his own blood. On New Year's Eve of 1899, the entire Preston family, including Charlie, gathered on the porch to watch the sunset and welcome the new century. Samuel stood with his arm around Georgia. Their children clustered around them and felt a profound sense of contentment. 20 years ago, I was a lonely rancher wondering if I would ever have a family, he said to Georgia. And now look at this. Look at what we built together. Georgia leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. We built a good life, a beautiful life. And it all started because you had the courage to do the right thing, even when it was hard. The right thing has never been hard when it comes to you, Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. As the sun set on the last day of the 19th century, Samuel looked around at his family and felt overwhelmingly grateful. He thought about that cold November morning 17 years ago, when he had seen a young woman barefoot in the frost and made a promise. "You will never feel cold again," he had said, and he had spent every day since keeping that promise. But what he had not known then was that Georgia would make the same promise to him in return, that she would warm his life in ways he had never imagined possible, that she would fill the cold, empty spaces in his heart with love and laughter and purpose. The new century arrived with hope and promise, and the Preston family entered it together, bound by love and strengthened by the knowledge that they had been given something precious and rare. A second chance, a new beginning, and a love that would last a lifetime. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Thomas married at 22, bringing his bride Emma to live on the ranch and learn the business alongside him. Samuel officially handed over the day-to-day management of the ranch to his son in 1905, though he continued to work and offer guidance. Catherine graduated from college with honors in 1904 and returned to Nevada to open her own school in a neighboring town, carrying on her mother's legacy of education and service. Benjamin went east to study veterinary medicine and returned in 1908 to establish a practice that served the ranchers and farmers of the region. Rose, the youngest, proved to have a gift for music and eventually became a piano teacher, filling the Preston home with beautiful melodies. Charlie passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1906 at the age of 77, surrounded by the family he had helped build. They buried him on the hill next to Samuel's parents, and Samuel made sure his headstone read, "Charles Martinez, beloved friend and grandfather." The entire community attended his funeral, a testament to the impact he had made on so many lives. As Samuel and Georgia entered their 50s, they began to slow down, spending more time with their growing number of grandchildren and less time on the physical demands of ranch work. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about the past and the future and the precious present. "You remember when you told me I would never feel cold again?" Georgia asked one evening in 1910, when they were both 54 years old. "I remember," Samuel said. "It was the first thing I said to you after I bought your contract." "You kept that promise," Georgia said softly. "Not just by keeping me warm physically, though you have certainly done that, but you have kept my heart warm, my spirit warm. You have made me feel safe and loved every single day for 28 years. That is quite an accomplishment, Mr. Preston." "It has been my honor and privilege, Mrs. Preston," Samuel said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "And you have done the same for me. Before you, I was just going through the motions of living. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love without reservation, to build something meaningful." "We built it together," Georgia reminded him, as she always did. "Everything we have, everything we are, we created it as partners." "The best partnership that ever existed," Samuel agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the Nevada sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the distance, They could hear the laughter of their grandchildren playing in the yard, the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, the gentle lowing of the cattle. "I have been thinking," Georgia said eventually, "about writing a book. About my experiences, about the contract system and the auction and how you changed my life. I think it is a story that needs to be told, so that maybe other people will see the injustice of what was happening to women like me." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Samuel said immediately. "You have always been a gifted writer, and your voice deserves to be heard. I will support you in any way I can." Georgia smiled and squeezed his hand. "I knew you would say that. You have never been anything but supportive of my dreams and ambitions." "That is because your dreams and ambitions are important," Samuel said. "They always have been, from the moment you told me you wanted to be a teacher. I am so proud of everything you have accomplished, Georgia. The school, the students whose lives you have changed, the children we raised together. You have made such a difference in this world." "We made a difference together," Georgia corrected again, laughing. "Why do you always insist on giving me all the credit?" "Because you deserve it," Samuel said simply. "I may have given you the opportunity, but you are the one who took it and ran with it. You are the one who built a school from nothing, who fought to make sure every child in this area had access to education. You are the one who raised 4 incredible children while managing a household and helping run a ranch. You are extraordinary, Georgia Preston. You always have been." Georgia felt tears prick her eyes, as she always did when Samuel spoke to her this way. Even after nearly 3 decades of marriage, he still had the power to move her deeply with his words and his unwavering belief in her. "I love you," she said simply. "More than words can express." "I love you too," Samuel replied. "More than life itself." As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Georgia grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter and music and stories about the past. Samuel and Georgia were both 76 by then, their hair white, their faces lined with the years. But when they looked at each other, they saw the young people they had been when they first met, when Samuel had taken off his boots in the frost and Georgia had been too cold and afraid to hope for a better future. Georgia did write her book, publishing it in 1915 under the title Barefoot in the Frost, One Woman's Journey from Bondage to Freedom. It became a minor sensation, helping to raise awareness about the injustices faced by women who had been sold into indentured servitude to pay family debts. Several states passed laws making such contracts illegal, and Georgia received letters from women all over the country thanking her for telling her story. Samuel was immensely proud of her accomplishment, keeping a copy of her book on his bedside table and reading passages from it whenever he needed a reminder of how far they had come together. He loved the way she had told their story, with honesty and grace and a deep appreciation for the second chance they had been given. As they entered their 80s, Samuel and Georgia spent most of their time on the porch of the ranch house, watching their family carry on the legacy they had built. Thomas ran the ranch with skill and integrity, teaching his own children the values that Samuel had taught him. Catherine's schools had multiplied, creating a network of education across the region. Benjamin's veterinary practice thrived, and he had trained several younger vets to carry on his work. Rose's music students brought beauty and culture to the community. On a crisp November morning in 1935, Samuel woke to find Georgia still asleep beside him. He watched her for a long moment, marveling as he always did at the miracle of their life together. Then he gently touched her shoulder to wake her, as he had done every morning for 53 years. Georgia's eyes opened slowly, and she smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," Samuel replied. "Do you know what day it is?" Georgia thought for a moment, then her smile widened. 53 years ago today, you saw me barefoot in the frost at that auction." "I did," Samuel confirmed, "and I made you a promise." "You promised I would never feel cold again," Georgia said softly. "And you have kept that promise every single day since." "As long as I have breath in my body, you will never be cold," Samuel said, pulling her close. "That is a vow I will keep until the end of time." They lay together in the warm bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up around them, and Samuel felt the same profound gratitude he had felt every day since Georgia had come into his life. She had transformed everything, filling his world with color and warmth and meaning. Samuel Preston and Georgia Preston lived to see their 60th wedding anniversary, celebrated in 1942 when they were both 86 years old. By then, they were the matriarch and patriarch of a family that included 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 23 great-grandchildren. The Preston Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in Nevada, known for quality cattle and ethical business practices. When Georgia passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1943, Samuel held her hand and whispered his love one final time. He buried her on the hill overlooking the ranch, next to the graves of his parents and Charlie, and he visited her every day until his own death 6 months later. Their children buried Samuel next to Georgia, their headstones side by side, connected by a single carved inscription. 2 souls who found each other in the frost and built a lifetime of warmth together. The Preston family continued to thrive for generations, each member carrying forward the values that Samuel and Georgia had instilled: kindness, integrity, hard work, and above all, the understanding that love and compassion can transform lives. The story of how they met, how a cowboy saw a woman barefoot in the frost and promised she would never feel cold again, became family legend, passed down through the years as a reminder that one moment of courage and compassion can change everything. And on cold November mornings, when the frost glittered on the ground and the wind cut sharp across the Nevada desert, the Preston family would remember their ancestors and the love story that had started it all. A love born from kindness and nurtured into something beautiful and enduring that would last far beyond a single lifetime.